My friends, I think we're live now. We are trying this new software. I think I got Viva there. Let me confirm with Miss Faith. You there, Viva?
I am here. I see you. I don't know if anybody sees me.
I don't know if anybody sees us. I see some activity there on our numbers, so that looks good. I think we're live and well. Let me make sure Faith says that we're good to go. And yeah, it looks good. All right, sweet, cool, very cool. So hello, everybody. We're back here. We got a little special edition going with the estimable Viva Frei and Mr. Robert Barnes, who's going to be joining us here very shortly, I'm sure. And so we've got a lot to talk about. As is usual, though, let me do the introduction because we've got to make sure we get that out of the way. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help and Viva's help and Robert's help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our very system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you're here, Viva. Good to see you. And I know Robert Barnes just joined too.
Amazing. Yes. If you hear some background noise, let me know if it gets too irritating, and I will try to pull in and out of mute. And Robert looks awful dark tonight.
Robert's getting set up, so we'll bring him back when he's ready. I accidentally clicked the button. You know, I'm getting used to this stuff, but we've got a lot of stuff to get to. I'm wondering, how have you been holding up this week? Right, it's been a lot of legal news. We've had some pretty heavy verdicts come down the pike.
Well, it's incredible. There's never been an easy week or a light week since before the election. And we know, right. Robert and I were joking, once the election's over, we'll have some downtime. We can do the O.J. Simpson special. We can go back to old law, but it never stops. It's endless main news items one week after another.
Right. And we saw that, like, the universe, the simulation, whatever, just will not even give us a break, because the day that we closed out Chauvin, technically, we had another shooting, right? We had Daunte Wright now that we had to sort of open that whole can of worms. And so you've been covering a lot of this stuff on your channel, right? What's sort of been your take on, these events? It feels like to me like a lot of this is sort of escalating, or it's compounding. It's happening faster.
I don't know that it's happening faster. It's just that the media amplification is exponentially greater with every incident, and especially depending on the demographics of the incident. Some incidents slip under the radar, and others get amplified and misrepresented in a very significant way from the beginning, as was the case. Daunte Wright is one example. The Ohio shooting is another example. The media jumps on them. They're looking for them. They amplify them. They misrepresent, either deliberately through negligence or accidentally. And by the time the corrections come around, you have LeBron James tweeting, let's go after this cop who admittedly had to kill someone in order to save someone.
Right.
I blame everything on the media these days. Hence the
yeah, anti-media. I love that actually. And I feel largely the same way. I think you were more articulate than I was about that. Yeah, I think that you're right. Probably in terms of sheer numbers, it is not an increase in police shootings or killings or any of these incidents happening, but a couple of them happened on a very bad day, just a bad coincidence. And then everybody in the media is just spring loaded to just come out and make a big thing about this. And I've certainly noticed it myself. And so, we had Robert Barnes here, and then he just kind of bailed. So we're going to wait for him to get back. But I wanted to start with sort of a little bit of a background question, if I can. So I know this is not really legal related, but this is Viva and Barnes related. And so I was wondering if maybe you could tell us about the origin story about you two sort of pairing up. I don't know if there's a good story there or not.
No, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story that I always just take for granted that everybody knows, because I'm not used to speaking on another platform where people might not have seen the birth of the Viva Barnes relationship. It goes back all the way to, I think it's now April 2019. Robert,
Speaking
how you
of
doing?
Barnes.
Hey, yeah, I had to figure out because it's a new streaming thing. I had to figure out all the stuff. I managed to do it. I'm impressed with myself.
Yeah, and
It's
your
almost like when I almost set the kitchen on fire with cooking. It's an impressive. People have been suggesting that maybe Viva and I can do cooking stuff, and they don't understand what my cooking ideas are. I can tell you, for example, 3 great lessons. If you have a 4-quart pot and you want to boil water, do not put 4 quarts of water in the pot. Second, water can spread fire. It may not appear to be so. And third, there's a reason fire extinguishers are in the kitchen. That's my cooking advice.
This is the funniest thing. When I was in law school in Quebec City, I was eating like a pig. I mean, I would just boil chicken, literally. And so I was boiling chicken, and then I forget that I'm boiling chicken. I go for a jog, and I come back, and there's fire trucks outside the apartment, and I have no idea why. And I had left the chicken boiling so much so that the water boiled out. Everything didn't catch on fire, but smoked up. Fire trucks came, and I actually learned how to make homemade smoked chicken, but it sort of peed off the other neighbors. No, but the genesis of Robert and Barnes.
Yeah, I love it.
Robert and Barnes, David and Viva and Barnes. I did a breakdown of the Alex Jones deposition about 2 years ago. It was one of the first videos that was a true vlog that really cemented the trajectory of the channel. And then I started covering the Covington kids, or Nick Salmon in particular. Yeah. And I forget how it happened. It was on Twitter, though, and either Barnes retweeted or Barnes tweeted something, and I reached out and asked him if I could ask him some questions. We could just do a stream on the Covington kids. Got into his whole life. We went through his life, Covington, all these different lawsuits. And then we just started doing more consistent streams, and it turned into weekly streams. And it's birthed into something greater than the sum of our parts.
Yeah, the ultimate thing. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com.
You know, and we put that. So I tagged you on this, Robert, before we hopped on here. But on Locals, so Ma Fox, who helps moderate our channel, went on to YouTube and said, hey, go support Viva, go support Barnes, and put in the Locals web address and the link to your channel. And I'm not kidding you. He made a screen grab of this. And as soon as he pressed enter in the YouTube chat, lasted there about a second. And then the Google auto moderator pulled it right out. So, he said, and I'm not kidding, he screen recorded this. So it's like, hey, go support Viva, go over to Locals, check them out. Within 2 seconds, it's deleted out of the chat. We're going, you can't even send any love your way. It's kind of a problem.
Well, that's why you always have to stay watching the watchers. That's
right. So you got the magnifying glass. I'm glad you got it. Good. You guys got the swag boxes. That's awesome. Oh, cool. Hey, I didn't even notice that. That's awesome. Thank you for that.
Beginning to winning. That's what I was about to say. Beginning in winning, but beginning to winning. Yeah, nice little book. It's well done. And watchingthewatchers.locals.com.
Right. And so we're trying to, support each other. And I talk about this a lot on our channel at the end of the show that, we want to create this network effect to some extent, right? Where people are hanging out with other people. That's why a lot of people are on Twitter, because there's other people there and they get to see the posts and the updates and engage. And so if people like you and other content creators who are more interested in some of the fundamental liberties that we are interested in, there's a good place where other people who want to engage with other people like that can go. Of course, that's Locals. We've got a page. You guys have a page as well.
And so just to get accurate information. I mean, you're seeing in the polling, 70% agree with the Chauvin verdict, but that's because that 70%, almost all of that 70% has been listening to mainstream media. There's a lot of people that are very critical of Chauvin who have serious doubts about that verdict. But it's almost only the people that have that either watched the trial themselves or got independent sourced information from you, from us, from other places like us, because we're the only ones doing it. Mainstream media is not doing it.
But you know what's amazing, by the way? I didn't see that stat, Robert, but if that means that 70% agree with the conviction, 30% disagree with it or have a reasonable doubt about it, which is a good indication that there was probably reasonable doubt on the substance of the prosecution itself.
We saw it on our board. To some degree on Robert's board too, and watching the watchers. I would say 75 to 80% of the people that even were on our Locals board, I don't know as many as on Robert's board, but at least a fair number, came in thinking he was guilty of something. Yeah. And came out saying, most of them, I don't like the guy. I don't like what he did, but I don't think he intended or caused murder. And so Dershowitz had the same conclusion, and he came in leaning guilty. Turley was making this point that there was a major media disparity between what the trial was showing and what the public believed because of the media misrepresentation. So I think, I mean, now if you want honest coverage of legal news, you have to go to places like Watching the Watchers or other places, because you will not get, I mean, Fox was bad on this issue. National Review was bad on this issue. You had these quasi-criminal defense lawyers. Andrew McCarthy, that dimwit, is still talking about how James Comey is a great hero and he's going to put Hillary in jail. How that crap, how that guy still has a job. He has a job at Fox and at National Review. It's like he's discredited himself over and over and over and over. And these are the same people, by the way, that were gaslighting everybody. And I can say this now because I was just remembering, I already appeared on Fox earlier today, so I don't have to worry about Jeopardy. But I mean, these are the same people that were telling everybody Durham is going to take action. Barr is the greatest attorney general ever. He's going to take action. And they were the same people saying that the trial clearly, beyond any doubt, showed Chauvin was completely guilty of every charge. When any objective observer would conclude that's not a fair interpretation of the case. You could think he was guilty without believing that they convincingly proved it beyond a reasonable doubt.
And I was going to say, you not only have to watch the independent sources like us and people on YouTube to get the truth. If you don't, you're still thinking that Brian Sicknick died because he got hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, because the New York Times has yet to retract that story, which is still on the internet for people to see, if anybody's even following their follow-ups. But anecdotally, and it's a pretty decent anecdote. I know someone who's not connected to the news, thought he was totally guilty, and then was still surprised by the verdict. And I said to this person, well, you know, he was going to go to jail regardless for the tax fraud charges or whatever. And this person didn't even know about the tax fraud charges, didn't know about the 17 complaints, just thought, thinking this was his only charge, thought that the conviction might have been hasty or potentially questionable.
Yep.
Well, I changed. I mean, and you can go back and look at our channel on May last year, when George Floyd, when the whole thing happened. I was very angry about it, right? And I saw it. I saw the same video that everybody else saw, and I watched it, and I said, based on what I saw, Chauvin murdered that guy. Based on what I saw, right? And I was pretty unequivocal about that because we didn't know anything else about George Floyd. Then the entire trial fleshes out in front of us. And I've gone through this list a number of times, but all of the other potential causal factors that could have killed Floyd that we didn't know about when we watched the video, we know about it now. 11 nanograms per milliliters of fentanyl. We've got methamphetamine, a history of using it. We've got arterial sclerosis, hypertension, heart disease, a 2019 incident where his blood pressure was 216 over 160 or something like that. I mean, a lot of things that would have killed him. And even the government's own witness came out and said things to that effect. If we would have found George Floyd dead in his apartment and we opened up his heart and we saw 90% closure on his arteries, that would have been sufficient for death. If we would have found him dead and we had 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl in there, that would have been sufficient for his death. But when we combine all of these things together, somehow that's not reasonable doubt. It kind of was crazy to me.
Oh, completely. I mean, all three of us thought initially he was guilty. Dershowitz thought initially he was guilty. There's some other lawyers that I follow who initially thought he was guilty. Good Logic in part thought he was in it. And all of us flipped because of the evidence. The evidence just kept coming in and undermining causation, undermining exactly what had happened. We were given about, a 9-minute clip and thought that 9 minutes defined the whole thing. And it turned out that 16 minutes before radically shifted perspective. And then when you threw in the toxicology report, the autopsy, the data that showed that, in fact, this method of restraint very rarely causes death, the data that this is commonly trained, more commonly trained than I believed was the case until I started looking into it. I mean, you had East European officers saying, hey, we do this all the time. Yeah. You don't need the Crowder exhibit as an example. You just dig in a little, you're like, okay, my assumptions on this were in error. And things like, I thought the look on his face, and it's always tricky to interpret someone's look on their face. And I've had people do it to my clients and they misinterpreted it totally. People have done it to me. I had a law student 10 years later, still bitter, saying, well, you looked through all of us and found us wanting. And I was like, what? I wasn't thinking anything at the time. But she really felt rejected.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
10 years and nursed the grievance. But when I saw that Chauvin wasn't that physical leading up to it, like, that totally shocked me. I thought he was going to be a hard ass, doing just resorts to force and violence as an instinct. And then he only had he didn't even give him a real neck choke to pull him out of the car. I mean, we all know cops that have been a lot. If you do what Floyd did in the back of that car, there's a lot of cops that would have given you the Rodney King treatment on the outside of that thing. And they didn't go that far.
The things that I found most say, I thought he was guilty from the beginning. I still think he's probably guilty of something. I just don't know what any lesser charges he could have been charged with. Maybe not failing to administer aid.
Or basic assault. He could have been charged with just basic aggravated assault.
But this is the thing, though. The facts that I didn't know, and it came out of the trial, was that he could have used more force on George Floyd. And
tased him.
And when he said, when the excuse as to why he didn't move him, he didn't feel that the scene was secure. Okay, people say, well, 5 people recording is that's not a really dangerous scene. One of them is a mixed martial artist who looks quite menacing.
Who kept saying stuff. If he hadn't been saying stuff, it might be different. Now, I'm still of mixed opinions about Chauvin the last 3-4 minutes that he's on the whole. My view was when he feels fear, he resorts to force, that it was instinct in his body. But it might not have been as malevolent as I thought initially, just because he wasn't nearly as aggressive as I know the mean cops would have been aggressive right away. Well, they don't wait till he's on the ground.
They did say that even when the EMS got there, they didn't feel comfortable administering aid there. So,
and that belief was reasonable. I mean, also, the thing the media wouldn't talk about, this is a high crime area. They can talk about one or the other, but everybody knew in Minneapolis, that's a high crime area. That's contextualizing the crowd, right? If this is a country club, if this is a school setting, if this is a church setting, probably they're not going to feel threatened by the crowd. It's because it's an edgy crowd of an edgy community. I mean, the prosecutor, the private lawyer, he had some phrase for it, like we are the world, and they're all singing rainbow songs. I'm like, a lot of people, just like the paramedics getting out of there, wouldn't read that crowd that way. And the MMI guy wasn't singing Kumbaya. He was, saying this and this, and I'm going to do this, and why don't you come here, and so on and so forth. So I understand. I think someone in Chauvin's position could have reacted like Chauvin, though I don't think most cops would have. I think most cops would have adjusted sooner and put him in a recovery position quicker. I don't know if that would have changed anything. According to the government's own lead witness, not that the alternate juror recognized this. According to the government's own lead, Tobin, he said he was dead 5 minutes in, and it's like, hold on a second. That means the real problematic aspect, the pulse part, all the rest, that happened after he was already dead. And you can't be convicted of murdering a dead person.
Yeah, and I have no love for Derek Chauvin, and I've been consistent about that, right? And the name of the show, the name of the channel, the name of everything we do is Watching the Watchers, where I beat the hell out of cops, right? That's my job. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. We've got a whole team of people here who do that, and we want to hold them accountable. It's not just for sport, but we want to call out.
Metaphorically speaking, Rob.
Peacefully. It's peaceful. Yeah, it's loving, legal, peaceful, battle that we do. We go into the court of law and we duke it out there. But but my point being is I'm sort of spring loaded to find fault with the officers, but I'm trying to think about this from a defense perspective. And I can't imagine a situation where you would have a defendant like Derek Chauvin and you have a victim like George Floyd that has so many contributing factors that is not reasonable doubt. If Chauvin was kneeing on Floyd and Floyd didn't have any of those other things going on, if his heart was perfect, didn't have drugs, didn't have a 2019 prior, none of that, then you'd go, obviously it's murder. Clearly, right? There's low oxygen.
You at least had some neck damage or some bruises to the skin, some damages to the ribs, some damage to the soft tissue, some damage to the muscles. I mean, that was just incredible. I mean, there was literally no sign. I mean, the best evidence is what you were talking about. If you didn't see the video, every single medical expert in the world says he died of either heart disease or an OD or both.
Right.
None of them say he died of. And it's like, if you got to rely on the video, the other thing is, I have, as a defense lawyer, I have problems with a lot of the precedents they're setting, making mob justice popular. Felony murder applies to every murder in the world. Doctors are now going to come in and magically tell from videotapes when somebody's heart stopped. That's you taught that in medical school? Tobin was a complete fraudster. He's going to get heroic static. They're going to put statutes up to him. But when he started going there, I was like, this guy's a complete BSer. But now we're going to get more of that nonsense. And most of our defendants are going to be poor, working class, African-American. That's what a lot of criminal defendants are going to be. And everybody cheering for this method of conviction or have just cheered their own constituency and community right into being railroaded into prison.
And that was one of the fundamental problems. Whether or not anyone agrees with the outcome, justice is not just about justice, but the appearance of justice. And a 10-hour deliberation after a 3-week trial with 3 complex charges that are thorny legal questions of law and fact, to have 10 hours of deliberation, which I think includes like break time, It doesn't look good. It doesn't look like the appearance of a serious deliberation, coupled with the fact that the day before they go into before they're sequestered to deliberate, you have members of Congress issuing not veiled threats for continued confrontation if they don't render a certain judgment. Whether or not the outcome would have been the same in the absence of all of this, these contributing factors cause one to question the appearance of justice, which is almost just as important as justice itself.
Because the process protects everybody ultimately. I mean, that's what the Constitution's all about. You assert the Constitution for the guilty person because it's necessary to keep the innocent out of jail. And the underappreciation of this is really disturbing. I mean, I saw an article today, or maybe it was a few days ago, but it was in the Brennan Center. I came across it today, which is supposed to be a big First Amendment named after Justice Brennan. Yeah. And they were cheering the firings of people related to January 6th and the Rittenhouse donations. And it's like, you're a First Amendment organization and you're cheering people being fired for their politics, for their speech, for their donations, and how wonderful it is. I mean, the left has gone batshit insane. There's no other way to put it. They've gone Lynn Wood level insane. That's the level of insanity these folks have reached. And it's terrifying and frightening if you care at all about the Constitution. And other than Dershowitz, what Dershowitz said, he was on our show, he's like, there's probably 4 of us left that still care about the rule of law in America, because most of the people on the left have abandoned it entirely.
Well, right. And I've been very upset about this. You know, there's I think a duty, a responsibility of lawyers to hold the line when there's a dog pile happening, when the entire country or the entire media or everybody wants to go single out one particular defendant or person and make them the scapegoat for all of society's ills, right? Derek Chauvin has somehow become symbolic for all of our justice problems and racial problems, and everything in this country are sort of being funneled into this one man and this one case. And, you know, when we've already sort of beaten this horse dead, but the idea that there was reasonable doubt here, and this man was convicted in a situation where the government that was supposed to be ensuring that he has a fair trial and due process was sort of asleep at the wheel, right? And, you know, Viva, you went through and sort of delineated all those problems we saw, and they just kept coming. And here we are.
They weren't asleep behind the wheel. They were recklessly driving the vehicle. I mean, forget the fact that from an outsider's perspective, having the prosecution hire as many private counsel as they did to prosecute a citizen looks questionable. The fact that you have members of Congress who just can't be quiet, not just can't be quiet. Let me rephrase: who not just can't say, "Let the system take its course," don't do anything silly. Who can't even be quiet? Who then go out and basically, it's not a question of influence; it's a question of intimidating the jury members, whether they know it or not, and they knew it. There's no question they knew it. You have a system that is being driven by a form of mob justice that is going to hurt everybody in the long run, but people are just so happy that they get to politically exploit it today that they're not looking past the tip of their nose.
If people wanted to ever understand how lynchings happen, they got to see one in live time, because the Chauvin verdict was rule of the mob, not rule of law. And that's the problem and the danger for it for anyone who cares about liberty or core constitutional rights and remedies in this country.
Well, okay, there's one legal issue about this that, you know, I understand it now that I've been looking into this with Robert U. Gruler, the felony murder charge in this, which I can understand now how he could have gotten convicted on the felony murder, but not on the third-degree manslaughter or the two lesser charges. I can understand it, which means that the law doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because basically any manslaughter is effectively felony murder. So, the question is, knowing that conviction could be justified based on what the law seems to be, where's the remedy there? I mean, is there going to be an appeal on the substance of the law itself?
Oh, the appeal is definitely going to be filed, because they raised that issue pre-trial. The question is whether the Court of Appeals, which has not shown any political courage in this case yet, will suddenly show political courage now. And that's what I always warn people. It's always the most disliked, contemptible defendant that the government uses to create the most dangerous, perilous precedents that they then use against some of the most innocent and vulnerable people and populations. And that's what they're doing here. I mean, this is a ridiculous interpretation of felony murder. They even said in closing argument, the prosecutor, that you didn't even have to show intent to cause bodily harm and you could be convicted of felony murder.
Well, and by the way,
ludicrous.
No, but Robert, that's where Nate is going to think that he's going to dunk on you. He's like, yeah, it's strict liability. You didn't even have to have the intention to commit.
The court has never said it that clearly. So, but let's assume that that's an interpretation the court could render. That's what poses the problem.
Yeah.
Because then you have no Minnesota court has addressed the question of, can felony murder be literally prosecuted for every single death that occurs that could be called homicide? Because that makes it because their own doctrine says if the elements are the same, you have to go with the lowest possible sentence. So that doctrine says you can't treat felony murder that way. The Minnesota Supreme Court just about a decade ago said that you have to have the felony has to have a special risk to life, not only a special risk to human life in the elements, but also a special risk to life in the circumstances of the case. This is why Nelson asked for that to be the fourth element, and the judge turned him down. So that's why he's got a very clean, neat appeal. The court doesn't have to adopt the merger rule, which almost every other court has, because it's the only way to solve the problem of felony murder being every murder, and then every statute makes no sense. And remember, this is just interpreting a statute. Even Nate says this is an absurd interpretation of an absurd application of the law of traditional felony murder. It's ridiculous. Well, by definition, that means you can't interpret the statute that way, because the canons of statutory construction say you cannot interpret a law to lead to an absurd outcome. And so even the people saying you can interpret felony murder this way acknowledge that it creates a problem. That means you can't really interpret felony murder this way. This case just poses the issue directly. The scary thing is the defendant is so disliked, the Court of Appeals may put on record what some people have said you could interpret the law to mean, to now make it an abusive statute they can interpret anytime. Right now, if you slap somebody and you don't intend to cause them any harm at all, or you jump out and prank them and they have a heart attack and die, you can be charged with felony murder in Minnesota.
Well, this is absurd. The underlying act would have to be a felony, so I guess it would depend what underlying...
It just has to be assault. And in Minnesota, assault is either causing physical bodily harm or putting someone in fear of bodily harm. So literally a bad prank could constitute felony murder in Minnesota. You can start going through, and a smart appeal, that's what they're going to go. They're going to say, here's all of the absurd consequences of this statute. And the Minnesota courts have said this codifies common law felony murder doctrine going back hundreds of years, and every other court has said you can't have this outcome. So are you going to fix it, or are you going to be a laughingstock? Or will they say, we don't care, it's Derek Chauvin's the named defendant, so we're going to ignore the issue?
Yeah, interesting. I honestly didn't spend much time on this topic. I mean, for me, the linchpin was causation. I was just always sort of defaulting back to that. And it's, so what about any of the underlying felony or anything? If he didn't cause the death, right? If someone else killed Floyd, then he could have committed the felony, but nobody died as a result of the felony. It was the overdose of the fentanyl, or at least there was enough reasonable doubt there to make that argument and persuade the jury. But what we just did right there, what you two guys did, is I think spent more time than the jurors did talking about the rules that are required to apply to the case in order to reach an outcome. And I think that is troubling. Right. And go ahead, Viva.
I was going to say it was when it came down that quickly, I actually thought they were convinced by the defense argument that they didn't even meet the basis for excessive force, because that's where actually I got swayed on all of this. When in the closing arguments from the evidence, Nelson argued, but it was from the evidence as well, that he could have used more force and that this was effectively policy. And the only reason why they didn't remove him from the scene or remove his knee from his back was a dangerous scene such that he had to take out his mace because someone came up from behind him. EMS didn't want to administer aid there because they didn't feel safe either. I was like, okay, they're not even going to get past the excessive force because there's reasonable doubt as to whether or not they committed the original. And then I said, that's the only way you can get out of a 10-hour deliberation. Other than that, their minds were made up either from day one or at the last day where they said, it doesn't even matter what we believe. We're going to save our own necks and hope that the appeal process cleans out the laundry, because we're not in a position to do it. And that's ultimately what seems to be the case. And it's not a question of defending my original prediction. It's just a question of explaining and understanding the situation.
Well, and I hope some lawyers learn a lesson from this case about how critically important opening statement and jury selection is. Believing that jurors sit there and process information the way lawyers are taught to, by following the facts and following the law. This is a myth. This is not the way normal human beings operate. That, I mean, I've watched some of the reaction to that, the juror who ended up being an alternate, and people are just shocked at the level of analysis that goes into juries. I'm like, trust me, I've dealt with worse. I had a juror who really adored me, thought it was great, ruled against me, but was really sweet and wanted to explain afterwards why. And she was explaining this one issue was really important to her. And I was like, oh, would this piece of evidence have been real helpful for you? And she was like, absolutely, because I was showing a point to all the other young lawyers that were in the room with me. It was a piece of evidence I talked about over 20 times in the case. I talked about it so repeatedly that the judge had scolded me for repetition. And here she was saying, if you had just given me that piece of evidence, because that's the way jurors have memento memories. If they don't like if they don't want to hear what you're saying, it disappears from their memory.
Well, they're people. It's confirmation bias. It's confirmation bias and also self-preservation to some extent. I don't know.
She admitted that, by the way. She said she would never have wanted to vote guilty because she was one of the ones that lived in Brainerd where the current riots were going on, and the judge still didn't sequester her.
Yeah, there was a little background on that story, right? There was a juror who was the alternate, and she was juror 96. She got picked to be the alternate, I think, right there at the very end. And so this woman kept a lot of notes, and she did an interview over at KRE 11. And there was an interesting quote in there. Basically, I was trying to pull it up while you were speaking there, Robert, but sort of a summary of it was something to the effect that there was some pressure on her, given the fact that she was sort of traveling back and forth in between a city where there were a lot of riots and protests going on. And so she said something to the effect of, I didn't want there to be any more riots or any more protests. I'll try to find the quote, but people are listening to that and they're saying, how can a juror be impartial and fair if that is a real consequence?
That's the constitutional requirement. Impartial. It's not jury of your peers. It's an impartial jury. There was no way. I mean, it was always a crock to hold a jury trial in this context anyway, but then he made the mistake of not sequestering them. And then after that, and then the second level riots occur, and the congresswoman makes her state, and then he doesn't even sequester them then, and then the congresswoman comes in. So, I mean, he just kept stepping in it. The great hope is that this makes great venue law. The great danger is it makes horrible venue law, because if they say this is okay, then there is no venue rights left in America.
No, and we know, Robert, how you feel about this from the Enron case, which we've discussed at length. And the one thing I want to know is, did the jury members know about the severed pig head that was found at the former residence of one of the experts? I mean, I suspect they did, and I suspect these types of these types of stories, they spread very quickly, and you cannot keep them contained. And good Lord, I mean, you can't blame the jury members. You can only blame the system, and you can only blame the procedure that was adopted.
And I mean, it's going to depend on the bailiffs. I've dealt with some corrupt bailiffs in my life. So, because bailiffs are the ones that control the communication to the jury. And I've had 3 cases where bailiffs were contaminating the jury with external information. Sometimes, and a lot of times, false information. I got a juror struck because she kept falling asleep during the trial, or tried to get her struck, but I was unsuccessful. The bailiff told her and told the whole jury that I was the one behind it. So, I mean, I knew because she couldn't hold, she wasn't the brightest bulb on the block. She came in and stared right at me for 10 minutes, right after she got to keep her jury position. I was like, I'm screwed in this case. Gotta get a plea deal here. But I got a sweet deal out of it too. That's another story. But another case where the United States Marshal did not tell me that the judge had given ex parte instructions to the jury during deliberations about inflammatory pieces of evidence. I'll give you an example. They asked for evidence about a particular financial aspect. He sent back a chart that showed him a picture of my client in a Ferrari. So, I mean, how do you think that was going to impact the jury?
Not well, yeah.
No. But the marshal, totally silent about that. Supposed to has a duty and obligation to disclose it. Had a case in civil case, California, where they were feeding him false information that somebody on my side was secretly camera taping the jury and this other gibberish. And several jurors believed it because the bailiff was totally corrupt. So it's one of the stories they don't talk about much. I mean, it's a huge vulnerability. If you're the mob or somebody else, easiest plug point to influence the jury is the bailiff, because the bailiffs usually by themselves going back and forth with the jury each day. Usually the only and there's no video cameras there. So nobody knows what that juror said. I mean, unless the jury comes forward later and says, bailiff told me this, bailiff said that, bailiff did this. But if you want to corruptly influence the jury, most vulnerable point is the bailiff.
I found that you're right, and there's a scene I think in The Lincoln Lawyer, right, where he kind of nudges a bailiff or a clerk or somebody a little bit. I found the quote, but I wanted to just throw that out there for posterity. Here it says, the news anchor is saying, "Did you want to be a juror?" She says, "I had mixed feelings. There was a question on the questionnaire about it, and I put I did not know. The reason at the time was that I did not know what the outcome was going to be. So I felt like either way, you were going to disappoint one group or the other. I did not want to go through rioting and destruction again. And I was concerned about people coming to my house if they were not happy with the verdict." And so you're thinking, yes, she was talking about prior to being selected, right? This was a statement about her state of mind at that time, but that doesn't disappear when you walk into the jury panel, right? Those are not evaporating. And definitely
not when riots occur while you're in the jury. I mean, while the trial is taking place. Well, there's $27 million payoffs. Then there's a riots during another shooting with another riots related to the same issue where they're talking about this case. And then you have congressmen saying, you better convict or we're going to make your life hell forever. I mean, the idea, if you can do a jury trial under that circumstance, then we have no right to an impartial jury trial anymore in America. We have no right to an impartial venue anymore in America. So that's why Dershowitz is so aggressive on this. And Dershowitz isn't exactly a Chauvin fan. I mean, he's been unbashful at saying he thought he was a bad cop. So, this is not about Derek Chauvin. This is about much, much bigger issues where they want to use Derek Chauvin to sacrifice the Constitution, not just Chauvin.
And by the way, I was wondering, I have not seen any super chats, but then I realized that's because your channel is still demonetized. Where can people go to support you if they want? On Twitch, there's an option, and
locals. Yeah, they go to locals live chat. They can ask questions.
Yep, locals. I actually have our locals open, and I'm taking a look at the chat that's going through there, and so people can, of course, ask questions there. And Mr. Barnes, you've got yours right there. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com right on the screen. So
yeah, and we have a pin top of it back to going to the live chat on watchingthewatchers.locals.com where people can ask questions and get into. I can explain other ways that Nate's wrong too if you want. We can do a different conversation.
We'll get him on that, and we can all just duke it out, because I've seen him very active on Twitter about a lot of this too. But I haven't gotten.
And some of his points are fair points. Yeah. Some of them, I thought, buying into the prosecutors that was bubble gum in Floyd's mouth and that he never ingested drugs. That wasn't the most persuasive point I saw.
Right. Not when you're faced with a semi-chewed pill with his saliva in the back
seat.
Then it becomes, Robert, I did this podcast yesterday with die-cast movies, where one of the movies I had to watch that we talked about was 12 Angry Men. And, in 12 Angry Men, I saw the 1954 version. You have the one juror who thinks there's reasonable doubt and succeeds in convincing the 11 others of the reasonable doubt.
Henry Fonda.
In that movie, that was not reasonable doubt. That was unreasonable. Any doubt, like, the murder weapon slipped through the kid's pocket and magically the same knife ended up in his dad's chest. That was a farcical reasonable doubt. Asking anyone to believe that what was in his mouth was gum when you have a half-eaten pill in the back with saliva on it is getting into the farcical reasonable doubt of what's in his mouth. It probably wouldn't have been determinate, and it's not necessary for the argument, because you can still maintain all of your substantive arguments without trying to get people to believe that which is just borderline implausible. So it wouldn't change anything. It's just, why make that argument?
Squad cars now like a tiny cage. Like you putting George Floyd in the back of the squad car is like putting kids in cages.
And he wasn't
seriously.
He wasn't resisting, but he wasn't assisting. And then when you saw the 16 minutes,
exactly. That's an interesting way of assisting, or that's an interesting way of not resisting. Kicking, hitting, banging, moving. I mean, it's impressive work. I have never actually seen a guy successfully avoid 4 cops trying to put him in the back of a squad car. I've not seen that before. When you're already halfway in the squad car,
he was complaining about breathing issues before. It was the problem is this. I'll still, people don't like it. I think there's something culpable in Chauvin's conduct. The only question is, what is it? And then the only question is, despite what I believe, just because it was my initial reaction, probably imprinted on me, and even if I have reason to believe it, did they raise a reasonable doubt on at least some of the charges, but the issue being apparently on the felony murder, it's such an easy thing to prove. It's easier than the lesser two charges. They proved it, and they might very well have proved it, and in which case it might be a legal issue and not a factual one.
Other than the issue of causation, but from a reasonable doubt perspective, and reasonable force still is an issue either way. For all three. But the evidence there was not overwhelming that he was not trained to use that method of restraint. And I watch those other three cops come August. They have a much stronger venue transfer argument now than Chauvin did. It'll be interesting. The judge will feel trapped. If he transfers the case, the question becomes, why didn't he transfer Floyd's?
Yeah.
But how do you not transfer after everything that's happened? Because now the president of the United States has celebrated the verdict. Now the governor has celebrated the verdict. The mayor has celebrated the verdict.
Our Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier and the opposition leader of Canada have celebrated the verdict in Canada. And
Boris over in Germany did. I mean, the whole world is sort of responding to this thing now.
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing. I'm not a leader of a country. I do wonder what my reaction would be. I tend to think my reaction would be, as a leader of the country, not as a legal commentator, to leave it alone and maybe not even chime in. But it's the social media effect, and call it the virtue signaling effect. Everybody's got to chime in on it, and not even chime in on a factual basis. Trudeau and O'Toole, they turned it into a racial issue where I understand that's the sentiment in the United States. But I responded to O'Toole like,
no allegation. They're not even seeking
nobody raised. Nobody.
They're not even seeking a sentencing enhancement on these grounds. So even the prosecution is admitting race had nothing to do with this, because they could seek a sentencing enhancement under various Minnesota provisions if they thought it was a hate crime. Effectively, they're not, or if the discriminatory provision that they know race didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah. And by the way, so I saw someone say, I know you read the chat, Dave, but in this format, I can't follow the chat as easily as I can on ours. So I'm not following the chat, and it's very liberating tonight.
Yes,
I don't see any insults, people.
I'm taking a look at it right now. Yeah, somebody corrected me. Boris Johnson is in the UK, so yeah, the UK is also chiming in on this. But I think this is a good transition point, because we have other cases to talk about. We've got Daunte Wright, we've got MaKhia Bryant, we've got the Rittenhouse case. Fired. Right, we've got a lot of things, but how does this impact future cases? Robert, you talked about some of the precedent here.
Yeah, I mean, they even said it. These people were saying it on Twitter. Kyle Rittenhouse, you're next. So yeah. I was predicting to people on our locals board that they're going to try to use this template to repeat that in Kenosha. Now they're going to have a much harder time doing it in the case. But and I'm going to remember some of these people. There's some yippers on various YouTube channels, Young Turk channels, other channels saying, and the only reason they're not getting letters is going to wait till after the verdict. And once you get not guilty verdicts, they're going to be getting some letters. But they're going to try to repeat it. So it makes Rittenhouse critical, because the precedent of Chauvin is to take that and apply it to any political case they want to intimidate and terrify jurors into doing what they want. And now Kenosha's not Minneapolis. That's their first problem. The second problem is Kenoshians see what happened with those riots very differently, I suspect, than Minneapolis folks did. But somehow Minneapolis people felt guilty about their own city being burned down. Older African Americans didn't feel guilty about that. They were mad at the rioters and the arsonists and the looters. But somehow white liberals, I feel so bad that you're burning down my city, that you're attacking people, that you're destroying black businesses disproportionately. What a bunch! This is like electric Kool-Aid test gibberish. But Kenosha is a blue collar town, so a little bit different mindset, different mentality.
Well, Robert, it's actually what Gad Sad describes in The Parasitic Mind. It's a suicidal guilt type thing, where you have to flagellation as to be ashamed and think that you somehow deserve the destruction. I think Rittenhouse is going to be a much different situation for the reasons you described, but also.
Different lawyers involved. So, it's going to be a different kind of battle. That corrupt, lying, thieving prosecutor in Kenosha. Someone asked, I think, your show yesterday, or maybe the day before, about whether there's anything that's been done about it. Nothing's ever done about these prosecutors. Yeah. But once that case is over, I do plan to seek remedy against that prosecutor, because that prosecutor used the fact that he has immunity for anything he files in court to lie and gaslight the world repeatedly about Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse never was part of any white power group. There's not a racist bone in the kid's body. He's never been part of a militia. These were repeated, flagrant lies. He never fled. He never failed to disclose information that didn't explain security reasons related to it. The prosecutor just repeatedly, he got caught lying by the judge. The judge got tired of his lying, and luckily did not reward his lying, but it won't stop him from lying. And that's what, like, I've been trying to tell my friends on the right who are like, oh, we've seen the evidence. There's no chance of Rittenhouse. I was like, that. Just listen to that jury in the Chauvin case. While Kyle Rittenhouse has a much, much better defense on the facts, that doesn't change the fact that gaslighting is what led to that jury verdict. And people who've listened to the media version believe a totally fanciful, insane version of Kyle Rittenhouse. Saw it with the Guardian publication the other day, basically implying he was doing so carefully so they couldn't be sued easily, that he was some sort of vigilante. So he wasn't a vigilante. He was just trying to protect the business. He was the one running. He wasn't the running to attack. He was the one running away from, people who were suicidal. I mean, the first guy who got shot, it turned out, even GQ's news story got into this. The guy had been trying to commit suicide for days, was saying suicidal things on the tape before it happened. So that first guy that's why he's acting so, in my view, so nuts. But there's going to be a lot of evidence. Those are violent people who came in, who were the real vigilantes, to terrify the town of Kenosha, to burn it down and to attack its people and its businesses. And if you live where Kyle Rittenhouse lives, you're part of the community of Kenosha. This was one of the other media lies. Oh, cross state lines. It's the same thing. It's like living in Alexandria outside of DC, or living in the New Jersey suburbs right outside New York City. You're part of New York. You're part of DC. And in the same context, if you live in that part of Illinois, as the judge himself noted, you're really part of Kenosha. But it means we have to go to the wall. You have to get all the best evidence, do all the best jury selection, do all the best surveys and reviews. And this proves again why you have to fight in the court of public opinion. You can't let the court of public opinion for a whole year think that this 9-minute videotape is the definition of the case and think you're somehow going to reverse that when you get to trial. So we have to fight to reverse that now. I mean, there were some media outlets taking shots at me saying maybe there should be a gag order. I haven't appeared yet in the case, so good luck with that. But they're trying to put a gag order on me as soon as I started being effective, because they're like, hey, have you ever heard of the media ask for a gag order? You have Wisconsin media outlets and Chicago media outlets saying maybe there should be a gag order with some of the things that Barnes is saying about the poor little lying, thieving, cheating prosecutor.
No, they who knows? Maybe they won't need to get a gag order. They'll just rely on some pretext on Twitter to have an account taken down. It's you don't need to rely on the courts when you can have big tech doing the censorship for you. But
that's why it's got to be people got to be ready to rock and roll. I'm going to use the Viva Barnes Law Locals Board to help crowdfund for this, and it's to make sure that he's fully defended from these lies and defamation of the court of public opinion. Make sure that if there's grounds to transfer it out of Kenosha, that those grounds are determined. If there can be a fair jury in Kenosha, making sure we get a fair jury, making sure all of the evidence is developed. There's so many videos from so many places, from so many people that can be helpful, and fight back every time the prosecutor lies again in court, as he has a habit of doing.
Yeah, the crowdsourcing of knowledge and information is the most amazing thing on earth. And once you have relatively reliable sources, or you can vet out the ones that are not, it's incredible. There's no limit to what information you can gather.
It would have definitely helped Nelson. I mean, and why not use it? I mean, you could have a live chat going during trial for these trials that are getting videoed, and you can get ideas right there while you're right there sitting, doing in cross-examination even. So and why wouldn't that? I mean, it can't hurt really. If you had somebody that all they did was follow the crowdsourcing, like you're an associate sitting there feeding you intel, why not? So I think that people have got to utilize that, expand their tool set. I mean, we are all underdogs in these fights, so we need as many David Stones that we can use against these corrupt Goliaths.
Yeah, it's a very interesting debate, and this actually popped up in one of my listservs. So I'm sure you guys have other listservs. I'm on these email chains with a bunch of other attorneys, and right after the Chauvin verdict came down, there was a chain, a thread that somebody started about that, and particularly they were talking about sort of Nelson's performance. This was a DUI listserv, so we had just a lot of DUI, all criminal defense lawyers, all people who practice in this space, and there was a conversation taking place about whether or not Nelson essentially should have spoken out more, and whether he should have sort of entered into the court of public opinion to get out there in front of some of this. And I'm sort of transitioning on this concept, and on this topic a little bit, because I think pre-George Floyd, the answer, or my opinion, would have been more along the lines of, no, you don't say anything, right? It's already a defendant. The media in a high profile case is already going to want to skewer that person. What can Derek Chauvin say, or what can Eric Nelson say on behalf of Derek Chauvin that the media is going to interpret honestly? Really? Nothing, right? And so why would you give them any fodder? Why would you give them any material? You wouldn't. You just stay silent on it and let it go, right? And so there was a sort of a division on our listserv. Half the crew was saying he should have, gotten out and been more aggressive, because he didn't lose in court. He lost in the court of public opinion. He lost in society. And we're starting to see some of this. Robert, you talked about this like template that they're using. It worked. It's working, and they're going to try it again. And we already saw this with the MaKhia Bryant case. And I talked about this on our show yesterday. But that young girl, her aunt, was out there in front of the media before anything had even been disclosed about what happened, and this woman was not there. And I had this picture of her surrounded by cameras and microphones, and she was just out there throwing her hands up in the air, ranting and raving. MaKhia's mom was out in front of the cameras. Everybody wanted their 10 minutes of glory, because they know what happens, right? They've seen the after effects of what happened to the Floyd case and the national spotlight that has been on this thing for a year now. And it sounds callous as hell, and it makes me feel kind of gross to even say it, but it feels like these people are going and trying to shove themselves in front of the camera. I mean, they are,
it's a good money-raising technique now. You can set up a GoFundMe within an hour. You create a big news storm, and you have huge amounts of cash. It's just reality. And so, I think we all look at it as, well, people wouldn't be that crass, right? Here's a relative dead. Oh, when can I open up the GoFundMe? It's reality. We've seen it over and over again. Some family member, or somebody claiming to be a family member, will open up a and GoFundMe's happy to promote that. If you're on the right, different dynamic. But if you're pushing a Ben Crump, grifting, fraudulent message, is there a bigger grifter, race baiter than Ben Crump? I've taken more legitimate civil rights cases than Ben Crump has, at least that I know of. If Ben Crump's involved, it's usually a fake case. He's usually lying about it. He's lying about something related to it. He's there to shake down some politicians to get a big fact check and help the political class do whatever they want with the case to get their own promotion and protection. And, if he kept his mouth shut about Rittenhouse, I wouldn't have cared. But he wanted to go yipping about Rittenhouse. So now he's fair game and he's open season. On his nonsense and lying and grifting. And I'm tired. He is doing more damage to civil rights in America than anybody since Al Sharpton and the fake rape cases he promoted in New York.
The thing is, Robert, Barnes and I have talked about this at length as to how you wage the social media battle properly, as opposed to just getting your client into trouble, as we've seen with other lawyers. Yeah. The thing, when I saw the mother or the aunt, jumping in front of the cameras, a potential grift is one way to look at it. I tend to look at it from the other side, that they just immediately want to protect family. And you have, I think it was the aunt, come out and say she was a motherly figure, sweetest child, the mother saying the same thing before any of the bad video had gotten out. And, either to protect as just a defensive mechanism, or to, try to hide the bad news that's invariably going to come out, that's going to explain away the situation. Either way, but for the fact that there was video of this, and enough video from enough angles, those initial stories, as reported by NBC with their selective editing, would be the stories that stick. And so it can be one of two things: the way the social media war is waged, either for opportunistic grifting or for just defensive protection. But it is true that when you get to certain cases, the battle has to be taken to social media in a responsible way, in order to have the slightest bit of a fair chance at trial.
Correct. And, if I was the police union, I would have had someone like Dershowitz involved to highlight the constitutional issues. And then otherwise they should have been much more aggressive at releasing the whole body cams, because that was a key turning point for a lot of people. When they saw the whole context, was like, hold on, this is different than we thought. They let the city hold that back for months and then get the court to force it out in the open. There's plenty of it told you how politicized that department is. Because usually somebody high up that would defend another cop and would get that leaked to the press. Well,
and that in the case in Ohio, body cam footage was released within hours, right? I think it was the same day.
Yes, that's the big difference. They got it out right away. They did not get it out in Chauvin's case. The exculpatory part of the body footage stayed hidden for months. And I wonder if those Minneapolis police who thought, okay, we'll play ball politically, we'll give Chauvin in as our useful scapegoat, even though he was protected by Amy Klobuchar. By the way, this judge came up under Amy Klobuchar. It's part of how he got his job on the judge. That might have been some of the reasons for some of his rulings. I think he was a very fair judge, but on things like venue, he might have known to go a certain direction because Chauvin needed to be a scapegoat as long as for that finger not to point back at Amy Klobuchar.
Well, you can't imagine what pressure was on that entire courtroom. I mean, from not just Minneapolis. I mean, this is the country, right? And arguably the world to some degree, right? This was a vessel for something much bigger, and I have a lot of problems with that because it's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be about Derek Chauvin and whether or not he killed George Floyd, not about repairing racial relations in America. It's not that. There's a different venue for that.
It's not, it's not 1780. It's not 1865. Chauvin is not a stand-in for Jefferson Davis. But that's part of what the case ended up being made out to be. And so it's definitely a perilous precedent for what it means for other cases on issues of law, on issues of venue, on issues of mob justice, on issues of media being able to gaslit people that if you don't win in the court of public opinion, you're never going to win you don't have any chance. But by the time you seat the jury, which was true in this case. I mean, when people ask me how Nelson did, I say that he lost that case, but by the time they sat down. So maybe he could have fought more on jury selection. He definitely could have fought better on venue. But this is his mistake there is what almost every lawyer does. If you want to move for venue, you got to produce detailed polling data and detailed psychological experts. That's your only chance. And it's a thin read because of the Enron case. But he did neither. This judge might have felt pressure to move the case. If he would have come in and said, look, judge, rural Minnesota or Duluth or the Fargo market has a much lesser strong bias than Minneapolis does, and bring in a shrink to say, oh yeah, this, then the judge would have felt pressure. He made the point. He was like, you didn't present any evidence like that to me. That was Nelson's biggest mistake.
What issues or considerations go into the cost? Because you have the union paying Nelson. I mean, if he wants to go get an expert who's going to produce a detailed report, do they say you don't have a budget for this, or does he have an unlimited budget for the defense?
I'm sure he did not have an unlimited budget. Not a police union. Depends on how much they care. And like I said, there was a lot of conflicting impulses here. So now theoretically, if there's a conflict within the union and the individual, then the union still has to pay for the policy. The union might have an independent insurance company involved. That triggers a whole bunch of good faith obligations. So there are means to. Now, I think he could have had enough money to do that, though, because he had money to do other things. Now, I don't know why he used the use of force guy he used. This is the guy that looked bad in Chicago's case. I get he has a nice resume, FBI, all that jazz, or FBI approved.
Broad, I think, right? Kind of slick back hair. Yeah, I remember who you're talking about.
Yeah, he was the one who testified in the Chicago case that said that was used for, lost quickly. So I was like, why are they using the same guy who lost? When I look for experts, I don't look for the expert who's only lost, as far as I know, particularly use of force. Now, on the flip side, maybe a lot of use of force guys are like, I don't want to testify in this case. No, thank you. I don't want any pig's head showing up on my front door. I mean, that's extraordinary. Imagine if that was a mob case. Imagine if that was a Trump case. We would be hearing that for weeks about just that story.
I didn't even hear about it until someone had mentioned it in our chat during last week's stream. And that's how little there was report. Now, admittedly, truth is it was at his former address.
Yeah.
Which is even worse.
Can you imagine you open the door, you're like, what the heck did I do? And I got a pig's head and I got blood written on it.
It's a bad way to come home from work.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, Hack Consulting over on Locals is saying nothing would have mattered. Even Jesus couldn't have done a better job. In other words, that everything was just so far gone. This thing that, there was an outcome that they wanted and they were going to get it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and maybe cool, no doubt about it. But I mean, he still could. I mean, he could have gone a little bit further to try to find. I think he deliberately chose to have no holdout jurors by personality. He was the one striking jurors that had holdout personalities. I think that was a mistake. Here's what my guess: he never did focus groups. He never did any polling at all. So because and he's one of those lawyers who really thinks I'm just learn the facts. And he did a great job of cross-examination. Did a better job of closing, in my view, than either one of the others did. The others gave one of the most inflammatory closings in history, which, by the way, tells you the prosecutors were not confident at all that they were going to get convictions because they kept breaking every rule in the book in terms of when you had to turn over information, trying to ambush the defense with their own by pretending the defense ambushed them, then trying to ask that question or sound like maybe they were going to ask that question anyway after the judge said it would be a mistrial. Then that inflammatory close that you just cannot give in a government case. And so you look at the aggregate of things that they kept doing throughout the trial. They wanted to comment on Chauvin asserting the fifth at one point. I mean, that's not the sign of confident DAs. So when people tell me, oh, this was a smart prosecutorial team, no, very mediocre prosecutorial team in my view.
I was, and this is not to be judgmental because it's always easy. Like every contractor judges another contractor's work, and it's always easy for the lawyer not there to judge.
Sure.
I was thoroughly unimpressed to the point of shock as to the quality of the prosecution closing arguments. They, to some extent, they had an easier case because they're starting from a better position, public sentiment, and all the other stuff. Their closing arguments were so weak. For the trial of the century. And for probably the trial of their careers, that this was the quality of the pleading. I found it. I was a little surprised. Nelson, calm and collected and matter of fact, and didn't raise his voice and stuck to the facts. It's a style. It's not everybody's style, but at the end of the day, this based on the deliberations, this decision was done before anything. There was no way. I think the only if you're the defense attorney, the only thing you can maybe say is let all the mistakes happen so you have maximum chance for appeal. Then it's going to be a question of seeing what happens on appeal.
You try to plant as many landmines as possible. You just start throwing grenades. Because when you know the jury is totally against you. And that's why it's important. But he had no jury selection person in the room with him. I mean, I thought maybe that woman was, but she was there the whole trial. I think it's paralegal. So I don't think he had any jury selection person with him to pick the jury. No body language people to help with jury selection because they can be tremendous. Handwriting forensic. And my guess he didn't. I thought maybe he really did a deep dive on these jurors because he got written questionnaires and their names months in advance. Not and the way they came back.
Yeah, he had some social media posts and stuff like that. But
he did. But he must not have read it very well because that's a bad jury. That wasn't, he could have, I think, got a mediocre jury that still hung him, but not as bad as that jury. That's one of the worst. And I'm a huge jury trial defender, but I'm not one of these. God bless every jury. They think hard, and they're smart, and they're moral. I've talked to too many jurors. You get the whole scope of humanity. And you get some brilliant and beautiful parts, and you get some not so pretty parts. And that was a disgraceful jury.
Yeah, it was. The whole thing is just troubling to me. I think that as a defense lawyer, as somebody who is really, really concerned about the law and what we do, when I see a dog pile like this, I know that my two strongest weapons are the presumption of innocence and the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And I'm not sure that we got either one of those in this case. And we're already seeing sort of the same pattern escalate on some of these other cases. And, we've seen this sort of playbook in the past. And Robert, you sort of touched on this briefly, but the idea that maybe the pressure from society is too strong to get a good team together even. I mean, we saw this with Trump during the litigation that was taking place right after the election, right? There were lawyers who were just bailing out of the team because of the pressure. And, Nelson, maybe there were no other expert witnesses who wanted to come on the team because nobody wanted to be involved in the case. And the police departments, typically will circle their wagons. Everybody protects the officers, but in this case, Chauvin was just sacrificed, right? Everybody got rid of him. The local government, the media, police unions, everybody was just like, we don't want anything to do with this guy. And that is troubling because everybody deserves a defense. And we have those two things called a reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. And if this playbook is applied to these other cases, whether it's Kim Potter or this new officer whose name escapes me right now, or Rittenhouse, that is not good for America. And it's also not good for the same communities, the same demographics, today, whatever. Those same prosecutors who convicted Derek Chauvin, they're going to be prosecuting people like George Floyd again. And if those people don't have the presumption of innocence and the reasonable doubt standard, they're going to get killed in court. And I don't want to see that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to take the precedents they set against a questionable, quasi-corrupt Chauvin And now the next step is to apply it to the more innocent person they can in the most difficult jurisdiction possible to prove how far they can take it. That's why they were they were bragging about it on social media. Kyle Rittenhouse, you're next. And then LeBron James was talking about the cop in Columbus.
That's what blows my mind is, on the one hand, the players involved and the level of reach of their respective disinformation. Where LeBron James had 50 million followers or millions
a lot
on Twitter, and in a statement which, if it came out of anybody else's mouth on the political spectrum, they would have been booted from Twitter in a heartbeat. And no sanction, no nothing. And as many people who saw that tweet may never see his correction tweet, which was more of a rubbing salt in his mistake in the first place. It's reactionary justice, and people have gotten accustomed to it because of the rewards are social media points that just make you feel so good in the moment, and it doesn't even matter if you make a mistake. But what LeBron did with that cop, and what NBC, I think it was NBC or CBS, I think it was NBC, did, it's atrocious and malicious and absolutely reckless. And when LeBron comes out and talks about being so sick and tired of the hate, I nobody's listening to me, but I told him, you're the one fomenting the hate. And instead of celebrating a hard decision of a cop who effectively saved a woman's life, you're putting a target on his back and based on a misinformation.
And well, the other thing I point out is, someone's asking me what cops are going to stay under these circumstances, where the media can railroad you, your own police leadership can betray you, you can get fired for your politics, you can get fired for doing a single thing wrong in a single second. Well, I tell people, simple, it's going to reinforce the BLM narrative, because it's the bad sociopathic cops that are going to stay. It's the ones who enjoy the abuse. It's the ones that live for the power. It's the ones that are corrupt. They're the ones who are going to stay in big urban areas. Not your innocent, clean, family-minded cop. He's getting the heck out of there. He's either getting a new job, new profession, new occupation, new location. This is what happened in the 70s. The late 60s, early 70s, we got these wave of criminal defense rights established, some of them good, some of them pushed too far. Courts started becoming stereotypically pro-criminal defendant of a particular type, like they are now in the late 60s, early 70s. It gave us Dirty Harry culture. It gave us death wish culture. It gave us revenge culture. But what it also gave us was much more corrupt police forces. Clean cops were getting out, and more corrupt cops were getting their power more institutionalized, such that we lived in the Serpico era from like 1972 to really 1990 at least. That only started to reverse in the 90s. And I mean, we still have too many dirty, corrupt cops. I still wonder, why was Derek Chauvin not even filing tax returns for years? He's a W-2 guy. There's no reason for him not to be filing returns unless the source of that extra income is what's really problematic.
And Robert, I said something in the beginning that the media was amplifying certain stories for click and for whatever. They're doing that at the same time. They're not amplifying one of the biggest underlying stories, which is the increased murder rate in the United States, which jumped more. I don't know what the number was, but
6,000 more people. They said if cops' reduction of use of force may have saved up to 300 lives. Downside is it may have cost about 6,000 lives, because that was how much the murder rate increased in the same jurisdictions that saw police retract. Because what you want is the dirty cop caught, not the clean cop hit. And when the clean cop lives in fear, he just stays out of Dodge. Next time you see a knife fight, you're like, okay, let's see who wins. Yeah, I got $2 on this one. Who wants $3 on the other one?
The statements that were being made about let the kids duke it out, and it occasionally involves a knife fight. I mean, it would be the Babylon Bee level parody a year ago, and it's actually coming out of big characters, big players' mouths.
Valerie Jarrett.
I mean, you have to, and on her Twitter handle, she talks about equality and justice. Well, while authorizing, condoning, or sanctioning the occasional knife fight. And by the way, and I told her, a knife fight would imply that both people are armed. When there's only one person under the knife, it's called a stabbing, not a knife fight. But it's ludicrous to the point where it's not beyond mental gymnastics. It's insanity to support a foregone narrative that you have in your head.
Well, we live in a Babylon Bee world when O.J. Simpson is trolling LeBron about how stabbings work. I had to watch that 3 times. Like, I'm not watching. This isn't real, is it? This is real. It's been a fake video.
I feel bad. I mean, I feel bad even laughing at that idea. I mean, it's absolute madness. And when I remember how I felt when OJ got his Twitter account. Yeah, this is Babylon Bee reality now. It's no longer parody.
So yeah, I saw that this morning and I couldn't believe it. First of all, I didn't even realize he was out of custody. Number one, but number two, now he's on Twitter and he's sort of rubbing LeBron's face in it. I'm like, what the hell is happening? What world are we living in? This is crazy. Yep. So two quick things I wanted to mention on that conversation. Number one, Robert, I totally agree with you. I think that good cops are going to bail if local governments say, we don't want you here, we're going to defund you, and you're not going to get the same support that you got previously. What's the point of sticking around? And I can see this not, and I'm not saying that they're bad cops for doing that. I actually would support them doing that, right? If you're not being appreciated, this is America. Go somewhere where you are, right? If Arizona came down and said defense lawyers are going to get penalized for something, we don't want you anymore, I'd say, all right, that's fine. Pick up my office and go to a different state. Go where I'm appreciated. And I think that makes sense. And I think that we will see that. Now, that may be over the next 10 years. And then when that does happen, we're going to see the pendulum swing back the other way. We're going to have cities that have just burgeoning crime, and people are now going to be clamoring for justice. And then we're going to see the repeat of the 1994 crime bills again down the pike. And it's going to impact, adversely certain demographics that are in the streets doing cartwheels these days. And I'm not happy about that. And then number two, about these media, about the media, if the media is going to go haywire on basically convicting people before they even step foot in court, the remedy there, the media is going to be the media. They're going to media all day long, whatever. You would expect the courts now to fashion a remedy that protects the process, right? And so you would have expected Cahill, like you said, Robert, to do a change of venue or to revoid deer the jurors after Wacko Maxine comes out or after the city council. And the courts now feel like the courts and lawyers and other institutions like the Brennan and, all of these other sort of really, really entrenched should be the Goliaths in the room. They should be coming in with heavy arms to defend the process and defend the law. And they're all gone. They're all just abandoning ship. And so when we get to Rittenhouse or any of these other cases, I am very concerned that we see that repeat itself.
Oh, it's a huge problem. I mean, and that's why I hope to use the Rittenhouse case to reverse that. So they want to make it the permanent influence. I want to show other defense lawyers how you stop that from happening, how you don't let it happen, and at least start to give an example of how to push back, that hopefully other lawyers will learn across the country in a lot of these other cases, and that people push back in the court of public opinion. I think they underestimate their own role. When you see something like a reversal is what happened in Canada, where the premier was going to issue all these crazy rules, and there's still some crazy rules, but not as many because of how much blowback there was. And so it's your only chance. The way I tell people is arguing in the court of public opinion doesn't mean you'll win, but not arguing in the court of public opinion does mean you'll lose. And so it's the only chance we have. And then to utilize the legal system more effectively, trained to use cases as an example so that lawyers can get better at this. Those that are still conscientious, caring lawyers for their clients, their causes in the Constitution can still make a difference. And I think that's still very possible and very achievable. It's just now is really the time. The battle lines have drawn and the war is here.
No, it's an amazing thing because Gad Saad said it in his book, Parasitic Mind, that, courage is contagious. He didn't really say that, but there's another expression. Courage is contagious. When one person stands up with a stiff spine, other people's spines stiffen as well. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing both sides of it. Like, people DM me and say they appreciate what we do, but they don't want, don't name them publicly, and they can't do it because they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their friends. I never had friends to begin with, so I had nothing to lose. But it is contagious, and the more people speak out about it, you realize the more people are just shocked and appalled by the situation. And the Twitter world and the social media world, which looks to be the dominant voice of the world, is actually just an exquisitely vocal minority. And you just need to sensitize and encourage people to acquire the courage to take something of a stand. Doesn't have to be quite as bold as Barnes, but something, and just you turn the tide slowly, but turn the tide at the very least. It's a ridiculous world when people think it's a laudable thing to intimidate lawyers out of representing clients. That is when the world has gone topsy-turvy.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm still reading Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. I'm on Rule 11 now. But there's another seminar or a podcast or a speech that he gave on YouTube where he talks about this. Right, he talks about the dangers of speaking. If you stand up, if you stick your head up, you might get whacked back down. Right, and that's a scary thing for a lot of people, so they don't ever do that. But he goes in, and what's so brilliant about this talk? Look up Jordan Peterson. The danger of not speaking. He says if you do not speak, if you live in this world where you have a lot of things to say and you are muting yourself, that is going to turn into resentments that just fester within you for the entirety of your life. And then by the time you get to 65, now you wake up and you go, I've not been living an authentic life, right? I've never spoken up. I've never said anything that is true to me. I've never spoken my truth to the world. And then you realize that you kind of didn't live your life to the fullest extent possible.
One of the lines from Inherit the Wind, when they asked the teacher to just confess and get let out of jail, and he says, "If you let me out of jail, I'll still be living in a prison of my mind." And it's an interesting thing. You're effectively living in a prison of your mind when you cannot have the confidence or the courage to speak, not in an antagonistic way, in an honest way, just to say, "This is what I believe, and if you don't like it, too bad." And someone said in the chat, they deleted their Twitter account after 12 years. I still think there's value in Twitter, because it is a way, at the very least, to make a sensible voice heard. And if it turns into nothing but a bunch of LeBron James tweeting misinformation without anybody calling them out, that's not going to help anything. So, a smaller voice calling out the bigger voice, if there's enough of them, can make a big voice.
So, the comparison I used to give to people was that a buddy of mine used to say that the whole point, lived experiences, they show people are happiest based on their memories, not based on the wealth they store up or anything else. It's the wealth of memories. And he used to joke with me. He said, "That's great." He goes, "When we're 85, you can be my butler and tell me all about your memories." And I said, "Sure, that's a fair deal." But there's truth to it. I mean, the sense of a real, of living a righteous life. It doesn't mean sometimes you can curse them with your yes sirs, as Ralph Ellison said in Invisible Man. So there can be ways to resist without even being a public resistance. I mean, there's a lot of different ways everybody can have a role that can protect what's important to them and what will make the world a better place. And I think that but all of us are going to have to do our part because we face unique risk we haven't faced in a long time in this country.
So do you guys have about 15 more minutes or so? I got one other thing I wanted to ask about. So I obviously I don't follow Canada much, but I've been following you, Viva, a lot, and it looks like a mess out of there. I tweeted something the other day, and I texted you. I tagged you in, and I think you saw it. But it was that clip. It was that master clip of all of the Canadian politicians. I think I don't even recognize those people. But
Ontario politicians talking about imposing the most strictest rules in all of Canada. That was the clip I actually used in the end of my rant on the street, which it's an amazing thing. I spend 5 hours editing videos, researching, shooting, editing videos. They they do well. I walk on the street at night complaining about the curfew, half lit, half dark, and the video got almost 100,000 views because people. I didn't realize people don't know what the heck is going on in Canada.
Yes,
we've lost the compass here, and I said I'm going to run for office before I run from the country. Because it's still my country to save, and you can't flee someone you love without trying to help them first. But it's gone off the deep end. I can't go outside right now without my dog. 8 o'clock in springtime, kids can't play in the street because we have a curfew. I have 2 brothers in Ontario. I can't see them because they're on the strictest of lockdowns. The Premier of Ontario issued a stay-at-home order, shut playgrounds down, closed tennis courts, closed golf courses, and camping to fight COVID. And I said the other day, imagine thinking you're fighting COVID by banning golf. I mean, you have to be either dumb or a liar or a combination of both to think that that's how you fight a virus when the actual underlying problem is the healthcare system itself. But it's easy to punish the people for the corruption of the government because one problem is hard to resolve, and two, the other people are easy to abuse. But it's atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. We have a constitution that is seemingly not worth the paper it's written on. I'm sure Doug Ford would use it as a tissue paper to wipe his sweat away. We have a prime minister who's so embroiled in his own multiple corruption scandals that this pandemic is the best thing that could have happened to him because he doesn't have to address any of his corruption scandals. And you have a population of people who seemingly sacrificed, gave away all of their most basic freedoms out of pure fear and think that they're going to get them back, or worse still, don't care if they do get them back. That's my rant.
Robert, have you been following much of it at all, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, because we've been discussing it each week, and was it Viva? Was it Colonel Roger Williams? Was that the colonel got into trouble for what he was doing? Is that the
I'm not good with names, but give me the story, and I'll
the colonel who was assaulting women and got caught.
Oh, yeah, so that I'm not as up to speed on that story, but there's
okay. I'm assuming it's that colonel, but it's like basically the politicians in Canada are treating people the way that colonel treated women joggers. And so it's a bad environment. It's not like totally shocking at one level that the Canadians and the Brits would be even worse than Americans on this.
Yeah.
But it is to some degree in the sense that, I mean, all of this is insane. It's people just experimenting with people on a regular basis because they can. And the biggest failure, the biggest embarrassment, in my view, has been the judiciary.
That's where, I mean, that's where it comes down to, because we know politicians are politicians. The politicians appoint their medical experts. The medical experts say exactly what those politicians who appointed them want them to say. We've now been in a state of emergency in Quebec for 13 months. And they have not gone through the legislative assembly to pass these laws on the basis that it's such an emergency. In a year plus, they haven't had time to do it. And what do the courts say? When you go in with an interlocutory injunction, like a temporary restraining order in the States, presumption of validity of the law, you have to show some irreparable harm. And what does the same court say? Being locked in your house after 8 o'clock at night is not irreparable harm. You can go for a walk the next day. I mean, the courts don't come in because no judge, we don't have stickmans in Canada that I can see yet. And the judges don't want to defy the politicians. I mean, they're all in the same club. And none of them are suffering any of the consequences of what's going on. They're all on guaranteed paychecks. What is it called when you get paid for life? I lost the word.
Yeah, it's like
universal basic income, right? I mean, it's like UBI or a pension, right? Pension for the rest of your life.
And the medical officer in Ontario who's saying we want to be very safe and lock down everybody, getting paid $320,000 a year. The premier, they don't need the $170,000 that they're getting because they're worth tens of millions, but they're still getting their salary. They're living in mansions. Quite literally, our premier lived in a mansion that had a swimming pool and a cinema. Gosh darn, quarantine wouldn't be so bad even if he were respecting it, which he's not, in his house. You got people living in 1.5 apartments who've lost their jobs. They've lost everything. And why? Because our healthcare system can't handle 300 people in an ICU and 1,000 hospitalizations for COVID in a province of 8.5 million. It's Parkinson's law of politics. They pick the easiest thing to talk about because the complicated one is too hard to resolve. And people have been so terrorized by a campaign of $13 million a month on COVID advertising that they have basically, if they think they're buying one extra day of their life, they're prepared to sacrifice everything.
Yeah. It's institutional reforms need to happen.
Yeah.
It's a wild scene. I mean, I've been following your work and I've been watching, and I'm still sort of shocked that you're still in curfew and, under lockdowns and all of these things, because, Arizona is largely, we're open, right? I mean, basically everything's back to normal. And I'm wondering, is it a bloodbath in Canada? Because it doesn't, the numbers don't seem that way. What's going on?
The numbers aren't that bad. The numbers are not the numbers. 23,000 thus far, which includes, COVID related illnesses. So that's a separate discussion. But and Robert, just bear in mind, I'm not hyperbolic about this. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah.
I know. That's why I trust you. I wanted to ask you about it. You're a very reasonable guy. You're not like me.
I could focus on it more, but I feel bad. I mean, at some point it's boring. And at some point at some point it gets repetitive, but like there's other outlets out there who are really going hard on this and going after every story. I'm doing the overview, but can you imagine we have quarantine hotels? And now quarantine hotels which were mandatory at first, and you had to pay $2,000 for these quarantine hotels. Now, apparently not mandatory, but you still got to pay if you're coming back from abroad. So you just see the way these policy decisions were never really effective policy decisions. They just turn into indirect taxation. They just turn into total control over the government, over the population. And everybody who has the means or the political connections can bypass these quarantine measures as they do. But it is one of the reasons why we're so far behind. First of all, you know that we were out of PPE in the early stages because of government incompetence. Long-term healthcare facilities were the hotspot for the cases and the deaths because they were understaffed and the staff was traveling from one to the next, spreading the virus. Same thing as Michigan, New York type thing, minus the readmissions of COVID positive patients from the hospital. And a year later, we're slow on the vaccine rollout because our prime minister has more international aspirations than he does aspirations about protecting his own citizens. And so the only way you can respond to the lack of vaccines is to lock everybody down while you try to cover for your own incompetence. And that's just where we're at. It's enraging. But I say, like, luckily, I never did much to begin with, so I don't go out at night. But I'm not a 19, 20-year-old in McGill University who's having this type of life. I'm not a person who doesn't have a family. What do they do for work? What do they do for socializing? I talk to everybody, and I had people literally stop me on the street crying because they've lost everything. They don't have a job. They don't have people. They live alone. They can't visit their family because they can't leave, and it's just absolute devastation. For the underlying reason, as serious as COVID is, it is a hospital infrastructure failure that has been decades in the making. All of our doctors have been leaving to the States for better salaries, better living conditions. They get trained here and they leave our hospital systems in a state that can't handle the regular flu season, let alone a pandemic. So it is all a question of just covering for the government incompetence, and the easiest people to hit are the ones who can't hit back.
And they're willing to experiment in even crazier ways. I mean, like the whole idea of, let's see if we can get parents to lock up their own kids for 2 weeks.
And they got bit. By the looks of Twitter, parents abused their kids, government sanctioned abuse. 2 years ago, the idea of locking your kid in a room, but for them having Ebola, would have been court enforceable child abuse. Now it's government sanctioned child abuse.
Yeah, I don't know much about Canada. I don't know much about Canadian law or the Canadian Constitution, but I do not like what's happening up there, number one. And number two, I do know about condescension. And that video that I saw of those politicians sort of just looking down their noses at you, just going, hey, and if a cop wants to ask you where you're going, they're allowed to do that, and you're just going to take it. And Ma Fox over on Local said, you guys can't even have guests over at your houses anymore. It's like,
I cannot have guests in my own house. And I'm not using this comparison to demean anything. It is a comparison. We are in an abusive relationship with the government, and they are quite literally abusing us and saying that we should be grateful for it because it's for our own good. We can't live without them. The abuse is for our own good. We don't know how to govern ourselves, and we would just hurt ourselves more if we didn't have them locking us in our homes. And government forward thinking that strict and unconstitutional equals effective, you have to be dumb or incompetent or a combination of the both to do it. We have a constitution. It's very much the same as yours in certain principles, not the Second Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom of mobility, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of travel, freedom from arbitrary detention, freedom from arbitrary search and seizure. But lo and behold, a non-legislative decree and the cops can enter your house for a New Year's party and pepper spray you because it's a state of emergency. It's the Constitution is not worth anything if nobody enforces it and nobody respects it.
Well, it's not dissimilar from ours. Ours is trending that direction. They're trying to dump all over ours as well. So, my first thought was, how can Canadians allow this to happen? And then I'm thinking back, well, we did it too. We did it right here in Arizona. Everybody, it's to a different degree, but everybody just, oh gosh, we're so scared. Government, tell us what to do. And the government has been, largely inaccurate on a lot of different things that we don't need to get into here, but it makes my blood boil, and I don't even live there.
No, it's what I've discovered is that the Americans, at least a lot of them, enough of them, respect the Constitution to the point where there's meaningful pushback from violating it. But here, freedom of speech in the U.S. is quasi-religious. In Canada, not so much. Where people actually think you should be getting fined for a stand-up comic making a joke about a celebrity kid who happens to be handicapped or have a handicap. I see how it's been years in the making, but there's a fine line between hate speech laws and mandatory lockdowns of healthy, able-bodied people who are at minimal risk to the alleged risk in the first place. So it was a slippery slope that hit the cliff, so to speak.
Well, thank you for the update. I am sorry that you're going through that, but I really appreciate, all the work that you're doing to communicate your perspective on it, because people like me, we have no idea what's going on up there, and we just, we could sort of lose sight of that. But I want to wrap up with one final question, kind of on that topic, which is really, Viva, I was saying, I appreciate you speaking out about it. Robert, I appreciate all the work that you guys do. You guys are prolific. You put out a ton of content. You're very good at what you do. And you're highly, highly engaged and effective in this field, right? You're constantly sort of plugged in with the news. You're observing everything, analyzing everything, and producing great content, but not just content, right? I mean, insight and action. And you're sort of helping people sink their teeth into these deeper issues that are very important for everybody. And so it's highly admirable. But I'm trying to understand a little bit about how you sort of balance that with your mental health and your mental well-being. Yesterday, we had a comment on our channel, and I've experienced this myself. I'm newer to this area of commentary, or all of it really. And somebody on our channel asked a question about feeling depressed, sort of covering these news stories every day and just getting into the weeds and seeing all this bad stuff happen, right? Seeing like we're out there speaking about what the government's doing in your country or mine. And it just feels like there's this slow onslaught of failures for a lot of people. And, when you're plugged into it and consuming it every day, it can almost take over. So I wanted to kind of ask you guys how you process through it, or how do you unplug, so to speak?
Well, my take is I cannot tolerate forfeiture or giving up in any respect. I find it the greatest weakness and the greatest moral sin to not fight back, to not resist, to not do what you can. Maybe it will be futile. Maybe it won't go anywhere, but you don't know that. So why not try it? And the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he didn't exist. The greatest trick the system ever pulled is convincing you can't resist. And I saw too many examples of people throughout individual life, micro scale, macro scale, make a difference and make a meaningful difference in ordinary people's lives. And it's just too possible to do. I've witnessed it too much. I've read too much of history. I understand too much about the system to believe that you cannot make a difference. And as long as you can make a difference, why not? So my take is convert any negative into a positive. Anytime anything bad happens, what I told people on our locals board after the Chauvin verdict came in, which I found disturbing for the same reasons you mentioned. I said, my response to this is to double down on Rittenhouse and make sure it doesn't happen there, to show how we can reverse this script, to show how we can push back. Just because you lose a battle doesn't mean you have to lose a war. And if everybody who lost a battle forfeited thereafter, most of the great revolutionary rebels of our entire world history would have never had a moment's success. So that's how I take it. It's a mindset. Very much always influenced by two people. Nelson Mandela, who said, I'm the captain of my own fate. I'm the master of my own ship. Basically, I control my own destiny because I control what's in here. As you two saying in Silver and Gold, outside may be silver and gold, and outside may be chains, but inside I'm free. And the others was Medgar Evers, who they asked him why he wasn't afraid to die. Because that was a guy that was pretty much nuts. Because he's going to change the world as a single civil rights guy in 1950s Mississippi? Not likely. Not after those 300 years. But he said, he gave a great answer as a kid. I was like, that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to be a little Medgar Evers. He said, most men, they asked him why he wasn't afraid to die. And he said, most men die 1,000 deaths every day. He said, I'm only going to die once. And I was like, that's my kind of guy. So that's who my models are. That's who my mentors are. As Martin Luther King said, I've been to the mountaintop and I'm not fearing what any man can do to me. That's the mindset and mentality I think is necessary to do good in the world. And it's the only mentality worth doing anything in the world. And consequently, why not? So otherwise, be happy in the interim.
Well, Robert and I, when people say that the sum is greater than our parts, it's because Robert and I are very different in a number of respects. This is one of them. Robert doesn't have fear. I am the embodiment of fear. I am the guy that dies 1,000 times every day when I cross the street, when I get into an elevator. And so I was told once upon a time, like with generalized anxiety, it's going to find a hook to hang on. So regardless of what is going on, you're going to find something to be anxious about. And so I was no less anxious and no less overwhelmed in the practice of law. I would dream of law cases. I would wake up in the middle of the night sweating. So whatever is going on, I'll find something to hang my coat of anxiety on. I'll find that hook. So it may as well be something productive, and it may as well be something that can hopefully affect some form of change. I think the biggest, my despair in law was that I didn't think I was making any form of change, meaningful change whatsoever. Here, same concern, same anxiety, same overwhelmed feeling at times, same feeling that the system is crumbling faster than it can be salvaged. And the other thing is, like, this is just where it's pushed me. I didn't think I'd be doing this. I didn't think this would be where I would be going, but it's you can't fight the tide at some point, and your voice finds you at some point. So the anxiety, you live with it. The overwhelming stress of what's going on in the world, getting thousands of email. Everybody has another important question of law they want you to look into. You deal with it, you prioritize, and you come to grips with the fact that you're going to deal with the issues that you can deal with, and and try to stay abreast of all the other stuff. Disconnecting, I'm the worst person in the world to disconnect, and I'm not disconnected. I can't, and when I disconnect, I get more stressed than when I'm connected, and which might be a long-term problem. And I'm, there's cognitive behavioral therapy for these types of things, but bottom line, I think Robert's hardwired the way he is. I'm hardwired the way I am, and it's going to find its way regardless of what's going on. So I may as well be something that I like, something that I feel is contributing to the world, and something that I feel is making a difference. And the flip side, I got no choice, because if Canada's going this way, I'm stuck in it, and I'm going to do what I can to make it better before I give up on it.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's why you guys make such a good team. I mean, I think I can see both aspects, both components of what you both just described there. And when you combine the two, I think it is a very, very powerful force, as we are seeing. And so if I had to chime in on that, I'd say one of the things that's been helpful to me is meeting guys like you, sort of getting plugged in, and then the idea of building a community, to sort of fortify ourselves against some of those external forces that are very aggressive and largely unethical, right? So if we can sort of circle our own wagons, build our own platform, our own community where we can help each other, that is better for everybody, which is where we're going to plug right now. We're going to send some people over to our locals platform. So first and foremost, go check out vivabarneslaw.locals.com. It's right there on the screen. So go check that out. Ours is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. A lot of awesome people. You guys have a massive community over there, and you just post a ton of stuff. So, I mean, I'm impressed. I'm trying to see how I can
Robert is prolific. No, Robert's prolific. I can't even keep up with him. And
it's crazy.
The one thing the thing I forgot to mention about the community. Back in the day, there was no olive oil niche. Nobody was interested in the different types of olive oils, at least in Canada. And it takes people to make people realize that they wanted something they didn't know existed. What we're all doing now with law on YouTube is creating a niche that nobody knew they wanted, and then when they find it, they realize they can't live without it. And it truly is one of those situations where the rising tide lifts all ships. There's no competition, there's no strife. There's no animosity, and there's no jealousy. It is truly one of these situations where the community lifts everybody up and expands the market to reach more people who never knew that this is what they needed to know in life.
Yeah, I say all the time, this is brick by brick, right? We're laying each different brick down, and every time somebody, heads over to locals or subscribes to the channel and just engages in this, they can learn a little bit more about the presumption of innocence or about the reasonable doubt standard, because what they are consuming in the mainstream media is like literal garbage. There's no legal analysis happening there. It's political bias and political spin. And so, we want people to actually get an alternative view, and you both are doing an excellent job making that happen. So thank you to both. So one final thought is go check out vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Of course, go check out Viva's channel. Many of you should already be subscribed over there, but if not, what the heck are you doing? Now's the time to go do that. And there it is, Viva Frei and Robert Barnes. They're both on Twitter. I think it's at the Viva Frei, and then Barnes_law for Robert. Gentlemen, as always, a pleasure. Really enjoyed speaking with you both. I'll boot us off YouTube, and then we can say goodbye. All right.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next stream. We'll be back Monday, 4 p.m. Arizona time, Mountain, and then the time zones on the other ones.